And let me start. Actually, we are supposed to start 3:35. So, hello, my name is Jo Kyung. I will be your moderator for this section. First of all, thank you so much for being here with us up until this last section. So, in this section, we are going to hear typological contrastive studies of Korean and Japanese. So I'm hugely honored to introduce these two invited speakers, Professor Ebata Fuyuki and Professor Jae-hoon. Professor Ebata Fuyuki is in the Department of Humanities at Niigata University in Japan. He has researched mainly Eurasian languages for years and published several books on them. Today, he will be presenting on agglutinativeness of Korean and Japanese, subtitled A Typological Study Through Contrastive Analysis with Northeastern Eurasian Languages. And the following speaker, Professor Jae-hoon, is in the Japanese and Korean section in the Department of East Asian Languages and Culture at SOAS University of London in the UK. So he has researched on Korean language and linguistics and language education and Korean society and culture. Today, he will give a talk on morphosyntactic contrast between Korean and Japanese. So as in the previous section, we'll have roughly 2 hours for 2 speakers. So we'll have around 45 minutes per presentation and followed by a question and answer session. So now we are going to start off with Professor Ebata's talk. So please give warm welcome to Professor Ebata Fuyuki. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Fuyuki Ebata from Niigata University. First of all, I would like to make an acknowledgement. This study is based on the discussion of study group of Korean Association of Linguistic Typology during the 2018 year. When I was staying at Seattle as an inviting scholar, and I would like to express my deep gratitude. So let me start. This presentation first provides a brief overview of the definitions and properties of morphological units and morphological typology. This paper then examined the agglutinativeness of Korean and Japanese through a contrastive analysis with several Northeastern Eurasian languages, particularly with Saha. Although both Korean and Japanese are usually regarded as typical agglutinative languages, their seemingly polymorphemic words may contain several critics. Thus, Korean and Japanese are considered less agglutinative than Northeastern Eurasian languages, and the nominal morphology of Korean and Japanese is rather isolating. On the contrary, the verbal morphology of Korean has relatively high agglutinativeness compared with Japanese. We also see an interesting difference in the denominal verbalizing elements of Northeastern Eurasian languages. I would like to skip the rest part and go to the section 2. Overview of the definitions and properties of the morphological units. This section provides an overview of the definitions and properties of morphological units, words, critics, and affixes. First, based on the author's point of view, the basic properties of words, critics, and affixes are illustrated in Table 1. Words may consist of a single free morpheme or a free morpheme plus an affix. In some cases, a free morpheme has an allomorph that itself is dependent and appears only as part of a word. Some free morphemes can be independent words only when accompanied by an affix, as in the case of Japanese or Korean verbs. These cases are illustrated through Korean and Japanese examples. 1. Kogi, hako, a free morpheme and an independent form. Kogi, bako, a free morpheme and a dependent form. Here, I do distinguish the notion free and independent. Batta, aruku, a free morpheme bat or aruk with the suffix da or the suffix u. I regard clitics as bound syntactic units. In some languages, clitics take an affix, for instance, Korean ida. Since clitics are bound, they cannot be used in utterance alone. At the same time, however, they are syntactic units. This is the reason they can be attached to a variety of linguistic forms. In addition to this, I do not agree with the reverse, that is, that a morpheme is a clitic simply because it can be attached to a variety of linguistic forms. This is vice versa. This is reverse, I think. This view is in line with the discussions of Nevis or Clavans. So I would like to skip the rest part of this section and go to the section 3. Overview of the definitions and properties of morphological typology. This section provides an overview of the definition of morphological typology in language. First, the basic properties of isolating, fusional or inflecting, agglutinative and polysynthetic languages are illustrated by two criteria: semantics and morpheme types. In isolating languages, both the lexical and grammatical concepts may appear as a word, or maybe it is a clitic. For example, Chinese has many word forms related to such grammatical categories as case relation, aspect, voice, mood, and negation. In agglutinative languages, grammatical concepts appear as an affix and one grammatical form indicating one grammatical meaning. In fusional or inflecting languages, grammatical concepts appear as an affix and they employ bound morphs that indicate 2 or 3 grammatical functions in one form. There is no widely accepted definition for polysynthetic languages. Here, I adopt Mathiessen's idea and formulate it as follows. In polysynthetic languages, both the lexical and grammatical concepts may appear as an affix. Here, I think this is why a word in polysynthetic languages can contain many morphemes. But again, I do not agree with the viewpoint of reverse, claiming that a language is polysynthetic simply because it has a polymorphemic word. So here I would like to the Mathiessen's definition and going to the section 4. Agglutinativeness in Northeastern Eurasian languages, nominals. The following two sections present the ways in and extent to which Northeastern Eurasian languages, including Korean and Japanese, are agglutinative. This section focuses particularly on the nominal morphology. In Turkic and Tungusic languages, nominals in general inflect by number, possession, and case. In Sakha, which I studied for almost 20 years, a noun stem can contain a plural, a possessive, and a case suffix in this order. For example, Ubaidarbutan from my elder brothers. It contains plural, possessive, and ablative suffix. Given a particular focus on the case markers, there are significant differences among the three languages of Sakha, Japanese, and Korean. The Sakha case markers are evidently inflectional affixes, not clitics, since they are paradigmatic and have the following features that show their dependency on the host noun stems. First, a noun stem can take one case suffix at most. Second, the Sakha case suffixes have allomorphs due to the stem syllable structure. Third, they do vowel harmony in line with the stem vowel. Fourth, they do not make up a word accent unit. Most studies consider Japanese case markers to be clitics. This is mainly because they are not paradigmatic. A noun may contain more than one case marker, and in some cases, a case marker and a discourse marker like dake only are interchangeable in terms of the position. For example, バスだけで行ける. You can go there by bus only. Other means of transportation are not available. バスだけで行ける. You can go there only by bus. That is, other means of transportation are not necessary. I guess the same is true for the Korean bakke and man. Korean case markers are intermediate between Sakha and Japanese. Some features are suffix-like and others are clitic-like. Table 3 below illustrates the differences in the grammatical properties in the case markers of the three languages. In Table 3, the Korean case markers are given with a hyphen, which indicates a suffix, but I would like to regard them as critics, giving preference to the first two features, multiple occurrence and interchangeability with the discourse marker. Compared with Sakha, the agglutinativeness in Korean and Japanese nominal morphology is relatively low, rather isolating. So this is the table 3. So section 5, agglutinativeness in Northeastern Eurasian languages, verbals. This section examines the agglutinativeness in Korean and Japanese verbal morphology through comparison with Northeastern Eurasian languages. A Sakha verb stem must take a verbal ending of either a finite, a participle, or a converb suffix. A finite verb form must take a person number suffix, which a participle or a converb may take. Finite form must take person number suffix, but participle or converb may take, so it is not obligatory, optional. Additionally, a verb can contain a voice, an aspect, and a negative suffix. Thus, the outline of the Sakha verbal morphology can be manipulated as in table 4. So the obligatory unit element is the verbal root or stem and the ending. And finite must take person number person number marking, and the rest elements are optional. A Japanese verb stem must take a verbal ending. Additionally, a verb can contain a voice suffix. Negation is denoted by the suffix na, but it has an adjectival conjugation. So na derives an adjective. Aspect is expressed by a periphrastic structure combined with a delexicalized auxiliary verb such as iru or oku. In addition, there are many critiques involving modality or speech act. Thus, a seemingly polymorphemic Japanese verb form is, in fact, not a single word form, and the agglutinativeness of Japanese verb morphology is relatively low. So for example, the example 7, 走りたがらないらしかったそうだよ。This example is apparently contains several morphemes, so this seems to be polymorphemic word, single word, but actually this contains several critics, so this is not considered to be polymorphemic single word. Table 5 illustrates the Japanese verbal morphology, and this is based on my own idea. In Japanese, root and ending are obligatory, and this is the, one of the Japanese verbal morphology, one of the features of in Japanese verbal morphology, that is, it has rich derivational morphology, including voice suffixes. And some derivation suffixes make adjectival forms, adjectival noun forms, or nominal forms. And there are many critics after appearing afterward. A Korean verb stem must take a verbal ending. Additionally, a verb can contain a voice, a honorific, a tense, and a polite suffix. Negation critics, an and mo, may precede a verb stem. Aspect is expressed by a periphrastic structure combined with a delexicalized auxiliary verb such as itta or notta. In addition, there are many critiques involving modality or speech act. Thus, the agglutinativeness of Korean verbal morphology is higher than that of Japanese. So table 6 shows the outline of the Korean verbal morphology, but I'm not confident this is right or not. In Korean also, root and ending are obligatory. And Korean has many suffixes, song, omar, omi. Because of these suffixes, Korean verbal morphology is has high agglutinativeness than that of Japanese. And I think I regard nominal gi or as a inflectional ending, not derivational one. But in Japanese verbal morphology, nominal suffix, the form is 0, is considered to be derivational. The reason is Korean ki can contain tense suffix, but Japanese one cannot. Related to the 혼재성 교수님의 presentation of Professor 혼재성, Korean ga and da is very interesting because in many languages, polar question is formed merely by intonation, but Korean da is never questionalized. Korean da is never used in question forms with the help of intonation. 갑니다 is not a question sentence. So this is very interesting in my view. But my students from China, so Chinese Korean, once said to me that in Chinese Korean, that form can make a question sentence merely by intonation. So 갑니다 can be questional sentence in Chinese Korean. I'm not sure, but if some of you can give us the sentences, example sentences, let us know later. So let me go into the next. There's an interesting difference in the denominal verbalizing elements of Northeastern Eurasian languages, Karyak, Udehe, and Sakha and Tuvan. In Karyak and Udehe, there are several different denominal verbalizing affixes according to the meaning. For instance, Karyak employs the circumfix ta for make, the suffix ngait for get, and the suffix tve for remove. Udehe also has a variety of verbalizing suffixes. On the other hand, Sakha employs a single verbalizing suffix la, which has a wide range of meanings, although they have several allomorphemic forms due to the regular consonant assimilation and the vowel harmony rule. The same is true for Tuvan equivalent la. So table 7 shows the difference between Karyak and Udehe and Sakha and Tuvan. The Sakha and Tuvan denominal verbalizing suffixes are rather grammatical. They simply give a verbal property to announce them, and the verbal meaning is determined depending on the respective case. Compared with them, the Koryak and Udehe denominal verbalizing suffixes or affixes, because including circumfixes, are more lexical in that each has a particular lexical meaning according to the derivative verbs. The Korean hada and the Japanese suru are also widely used verbalizing elements, but they are clitics, not suffixes, since they allow other elements to intervene immediately after the host noun stem. So, gonbu hada, gonbudo hada, gonbu anada, benkyou suru, benkyou mo suru. Here, I would like to make an addition. Korean hada is two folds. One is critic hada, as in gonbu hada, but one is suffix. For example, 강 hada, 전 hada. So, critic hada allows element to intervene, but suffix hada do not. This is also true for the Japanese suru. So, 勉強する can be divisible into two parts, but 愛する cannot. Thus, the difference, the nominal verbalizing elements of Northeastern Eurasian languages can be summarized as in Table 8. So, conclusion. This presentation first provided a brief overview of the definitions and properties of morphological units and morphological typology. I then examined the agglutinativeness of nominals and verbals of Northeastern Eurasian languages, particularly Korean and Japanese. Although both Korean and Japanese are usually regarded as typical agglutinative languages, their seemingly polymorphemic words may contain several critics. Thus, Korean and Japanese are considered less agglutinative than Northeastern Eurasian languages. The nominal morphologies of Korean and Japanese are rather isolating. For example, the case markers of Korean and Japanese are critics, not suffixes, although the Korean case markers are intermediate between critics and suffixes. On the other hand, the verbal morphology of Korean has relatively high agglutinativeness compared with Japanese. There is an interesting difference among the denominal verbalizing elements of Northeastern Eurasian languages. Koryak and Udehe have several lexical suffixes for their respective meanings. Saha and Tuvan exploit a single grammatical suffix that has a wide range of meanings. Korean and Japanese verbalizing elements are also semantically wide-ranging, but they are critics and not suffixes. And there is an abstract in Korean, and there is an additional notes, and here I added one example. I'm not sure these examples are right in also Korean, but in Japanese, these Chinese words are very exceptional in terms of morphology or morphological unit. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Ebata Fuyuki, and thank you for the all, linguistically quite well elaborated presentation. And actually, we started quite a little bit late, but we might have some, question and answer time. Probably we might take 10 minutes from now on. So, but actually, I'm sorry for this. I'm not knowledgeable about Japanese. So, but in participant list, I can see several Japanese linguists and typologists. So we might take some questions from them. So could you please ask to Professor Ebata Fuyuki if you have any questions?
I have a small comment. I am Jungmin Lee from Seoul National University. You say that Korean has a prenominal nun marker, whereas Japanese doesn't. But in my 89 paper, I indicated that you had kind of intonational prenominal modifying indication there in Japanese. You cannot say ta in front of the nominal. So it's a kind of phonological realization of the prenominal modifying affix or something like that. One psycholinguist of Japanese conducted an experiment to support my claim in 1990s, and they proved that my claim is right. There is a kind of a phonological realization before and now. After the ta, which is a kind of past marker in Japanese, you have a kind of rising or sustaining intonation necessarily, not just the falling. Okay, that's what I indicated. That's my comment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. You mentioned the Japanese past mark ta shown here, right? And you in your comment, Japanese speakers do a typical particular intonation before noun stem, but not another one in the finite form, right?
That's right.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So thank you for the comments, Professor Lee Jang-min. Any other questions or any other comments, or if not, we're gonna just move on to the next speaker.
Okay, I have a question. And Ebata Fuyuki, thank you for your nice presentation. And in the table, maybe 6 outline of the Korean verbal morphology. In the column, the clitic, I can see the su. What's that, su?
수 is 할 수 있다라는 수.
할 수 is the bound noun. Yeah, you mean,
네.
yeah? Mm-hmm.
So in Korean studies, 수 is called bound noun.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right.
Yeah, okay, I agree with you. And the bound noun is a kind of a clitic. Yeah, and in Korean linguistics, there are so many papers showing that the most of the nominal particles and the verbal particles is not a suffix, but clitics. Okay, and so, but I'm wondering in the polysynthetic languages, the Sach, some affixes is a kind of is really the affix, not a clitic, but I can understand in the polysynthetic languages, many affixes can be described as clitics. What do you think about that?
This is a very difficult question, and I rely on the Mathison's idea. So in polysynthetic languages, so both the lexical and grammatical concepts may appear as an affix. So this is why it can contain many morphemes. So for example, tense, aspect, or voice are up to appear as affix in many languages, but only in polysynthetic languages, particular categories, for example, participant classification or instrument or location or direction, these notions can be expressed by affix only in polysynthetic languages. This is why
you mentioned that in polysynthetic languages, they have the level of agglutinativeness is high. Yeah?
Oh, this is another problem. There is a discussion of whether agglutinativeness is a separate type of polysynthetics or different type. They are different type. I am of the latter opinion, polysynthesis is a problem of semantic category, and agglutinativeness is a problem of polymorphemic degree.
Okay.
As a single word.